They remembered the night not for its music, but for the silence that followed her name. Chandeliers burned above the ballroom like frozen suns, their light cruel in its clarity, revealing every lifted brow, every whispered mouth. Miss Eliza Ashcombe stood alone beneath that light, gloved hands folded, spine straight, dignity clinging to her like a thin shawl against winter. The rumor had arrived before she did, slipping between silk skirts and polished boots, and now it bloomed. A lady, once questioned, became a spectacle, once pitied, a warning. Tonight, her fate trembled visibly within that breathless, observing crowd gathered. Eliza had learned, by 22, the exact weight of a stare. It pressed heavier than jewels, sharper than any spoken insult, and it followed her wherever she walked. Once, she had been invited forward, praised for her grace, her voice, her promise. Now mothers drew daughters closer as she passed, and gentlemen regarded her with cautious curiosity, as though scandal were contagion. She did not flinch. If humiliation must be endured, she would endure it upright, refusing the satisfaction of visible collapse. Such resolve was invisible currency, spent without applause, yet costly always to her enduring heart alone. The host's smile faltered when the murmurs swelled, a tide of speculation cresting at last. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else pretended fascination with a floral arrangement. Then the name was spoken, carried with theatrical cheer, as though celebration might disguise cruelty. An engagement. A duke. Eliza felt the word strike her chest like a thrown stone. She looked up instinctively, searching faces for mercy, finding instead anticipation. Society adored a fall, but it adored a calculated rise even more. Tonight, she was both spectacle and instrument, shaped by others' intent without consent, without warning, without any refuge at all. He stood apart from the crush, dark-haired, immaculately composed, a study in disciplined indifference. The Duke of Ravensmere did not smile, nor did he avert his gaze. His attention rested on Eliza with unnerving steadiness, as though she were a problem already solved. Men like him were raised to command rooms without raising voices, to reduce chaos through presence alone. His reputation preceded him, ruthless in loyalty, merciless in memory. If he felt triumph, it did not touch his face. If he felt anything, it was buried deep. Tonight marked the deliberate opening of an old wound long ignored before. Years earlier, the Duke's family had been undone by whispers much like these, their honor corroded by elegant lies. Names had been spared, consequences had not. Eliza's surname, spoken then with false sympathy, lingered still in his recollection. He had waited, cultivated patience as others cultivated gardens, until opportunity presented itself in silk and candlelight. Marriage was society's most refined weapon. With it, he would bind past to present, forcing recompense without spilling a drop of blood. Revenge, when dressed respectably, rarely drew objection. He believed justice and cruelty could share the same immaculate glove on this glittering night alone. Eliza did not hear the Duke's name clearly at first. Her ears rang with the echo of judgment. Only when the applause began, hesitant then swelling, did comprehension arrive. A duke's interest transformed disgrace into curiosity, curiosity into grudging approval. She felt herself reclassified in an instant, no longer pitied but appraised. The cruelty lay in its conditional nature. Worth bestowed by title could be revoked as easily. Her expression did not change, though something fragile tightened behind her ribs, protesting quietly against such transactional mercy. She understood survival now required obedience masquerading as composure before the watching assembly breathed. The Duke inclined his head, a gesture precise enough to appear courteous, distant enough to remain unkind. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. In his, she read not desire, but intention, cold and orderly as ledgers. In hers, he glimpsed defiance carefully schooled into stillness. Music resumed, though altered, as if the orchestra sensed the shift. Couples resumed their turns, skirts whispering secrets across the floor. Yet an invisible cord now bound Duke and bride-to-be, drawn tight by expectation neither had voiced aloud. Power had chosen its stage, and tenderness was not invited to witness the arrangement unfold silently. Whispers followed Eliza as she retreated to the edge of the room, each syllable shaped by envy or relief. Some envied her elevation, others were grateful it was not theirs. She thought of a mother, long gone, who had warned that reputation was a glass ornament, beautiful and perilously thin. Tonight it had shattered, then been imperfectly mended with gold. The repair gleamed too brightly. She wondered what cuts might come from touching it again, bound now to a man who watched like a judge. Marriage promised protection, yet demanded silence as its price from a trembling, unwilling heart within. As the evening waned, servants extinguished candles, and shadows lengthened like unanswered questions. Carriages queued beneath the portico, wheels hissing on damp stone. Eliza accepted congratulations with measured courtesy, each word a rehearsal for endurance. The Duke departed without seeking her, his absence louder than any farewell. It struck her then that she had not been chosen, merely selected. Whatever future awaited her would be negotiated in rooms she did not command. Yet beneath the fear stirred a stubborn resolve, small but unyielding, refusing erasure. If she must be used, she would not be broken by another's carefully planned design. Later, alone in her chamber, Eliza loosened her gloves and studied her bare hands, faintly trembling. Outside, London breathed, indifferent and immense. Somewhere within that vastness stood her future husband, already certain of his victory. She did not yet know the full measure of his intent, nor he the depth of his silence. But fate, patient and unsentimental, had begun its work. What had been announced as an alliance would soon reveal itself as something far more dangerous, forged not in love, but in carefully nursed revenge, and a marriage shaped by retribution alone would claim them both before dawn. The first gift arrived before dawn, borne by a footman who would not meet her eyes. A velvet box, heavy as obligation, was placed upon the hall table like a verdict. Inside lay a necklace of pale diamonds, cold and faultless, arranged with merciless symmetry. Eliza closed the lid without touching them. Jewelry was meant to adorn affection. This felt more like a bribe paid in advance. Already the house breathed differently, servants cautious, doors opening wider. She sensed the Duke's presence and absence, his will traveling ahead of him, pressing her life into a shape she had not chosen. By afternoon, society had learned of the necklace, though no one had seen it worn. That omission became its own provocation. Callers arrived bearing smiles sharpened by curiosity, eager to inspect the transformation of a disgraced woman into a duke's property. Eliza received them with quiet civility, her voice steady, her hands empty of ornament. Each refusal unsettled them. Gratitude was expected or demanded. Instead, she offered restraint, which read as calculation. Somewhere beyond the drawing room, the city whispered eagerly, preparing to tame generosity into suspicion with practiced, delighted malice. It watched her patience as a lie unfold slowly. The Duke answered her restraint with further excess. A carriage arrived next, lacquered black, its crest freshly painted, the horses restless as if sensing resistance. Deeds followed, then gowns, then invitations already engraved with her merit title. Each token tightened the net of expectation. Eliza thanked the messengers and dismissed them, her pulse quickening with every courtesy. He was buying inevitability. In the language of power, abundance erased dissent. She wondered whether he mistook silence for surrender, or whether he preferred it that way within her guarded heart tonight. Scandal bloomed precisely where generosity met refusal. By week's end, a pamphlet circulated, anonymous and gleeful, suggesting Eliza's humility concealed ambition. The necklace, it claimed, had been sold. The carriage, pawned. Truth mattered little once ink found appetite. Ladies whispered behind fans. Gentlemen smiled with knowing sympathy. Eliza read the sheet once, then burned it, watching words curl into smoke. If he defended herself, she would confirm their interest. If she remained still, she would be defined. Either choice offered sacrifice without absolution. The Duke, she suspected, would hear every rumor and approve of the damage spreading around her name. He did hear them, and they pleased him. Each whisper sharpened the blade he had spent years honing. In his study, beneath portraits of unsmiling ancestors, the Duke reviewed reports with methodical calm. Eliza's discomfort confirmed his design. She was learning the cost of legacy, as his family once had. Yet somewhere beneath satisfaction stirred irritation. She was not pleading, not grasping at favor. Her composure resisted his narrative. Revenge thrived on visible collapse. Her quiet endurance complicated the pleasure he had anticipated. Control was sweeter when acknowledged, and she refused acknowledgement entirely with an infuriating, elegant steadiness of spirit. Pressure increased as the wedding approached. Invitations returned marked with curiosity, not joy. Seamstresses measured Eliza like territory, commenting on suitability rather than beauty. At fittings, mirrors multiplied her image until she felt divided, belonging nowhere. The Duke visited once, briefly, standing near the window while rain traced silver lines down glass. His words were courteous, distant, concerned only with arrangements. She answered with equal formality. Between them lay a silence dense with unasked questions, neither willing to grant the other advantage through confession. Power hovered, heavy and watchful, shaping every careful exchange with deliberate, exhausting restraint from both sides. The city delighted in escalation. A dinner invitation was withdrawn, then publicly reinstated, then withdrawn again, all to measure her reaction. Eliza attended what she was permitted and declined what she was not, refusing to chase favor. This baffled her observers. A woman in her position should scramble. Instead, she cultivated stillness, a quiet protest that read as pride. Pride, society agreed, must be punished. The Duke watched these maneuvers with growing attention, his certainty beginning, imperceptibly, to erode. Revenge required predictability, and Eliza Ashcombe refused to be predictable in her responses to carefully engineered cruelty and social manipulation alike. One evening, a small parcel arrived without heraldry. Inside lay a simple book, its margins crowded with notes in an unfamiliar hand. No card accompanied it. Eliza recognized the verses immediately, poems her father had once loved. The gesture unsettled her more than diamonds. This was no public display, no transaction. For the first time, she wondered whether the Duke's campaign contained fractures, impulses he had not planned. She closed the book gently, uncertain whether it represented threat, curiosity, or an unintended opening. That uncertainty lingered, warm and dangerous, long after the lamps dimmed within her guarded solitude that night. Gossip seized upon the book with inventive cruelty. It became proof of seduction, of secret encouragement, of ambition finally revealed. Eliza laughed once upon hearing it, a sound surprising in its bitterness. She realized then that truth and falsehood weighed the same when appetite guided interpretation. The Duke confronted her days later, his tone controlled, his eyes assessing. He asked nothing directly. His disappointment, whether real or feigned, stung more than accusation. She met his gaze and said nothing, granting him no narrative to weaponize. Silence, she learned, could bruise even the powerful when it denied them control entirely absolutely. By the final week before the wedding, tension had thickened into inevitability. Eliza sensed the Duke watching more closely now, his strategy adjusting. Gifts slowed. Letters ceased. In their place grew something sharper, more uncertain. She stood one night at her window, book in hand, wondering which version of him would arrive at the altar. The Avenger seemed assured. The man remained obscured. Somewhere between token and scandal, a truth strained against silence, waiting for a moment neither could fully control. When it broke, it promised to wound them both deeply and alter the terms of their marriage forever irreversibly. The chamber awaited them in solemn quiet, candlelight trembling against carved walls and heavy drapes. Eliza stood near the hearth, wedding silk whispering with every breath, her hands folded as though prayer might lend steadiness. This room, prepared for celebration, felt instead like a courtroom after verdict. When the Duke entered, he closed the door with deliberate care, sealing them from the world's clamor. His expression carried no triumph now, only restraint sharpened by thought. They faced each other across the rug, strangers bound by vows spoken hours earlier. Silence pressed heavily, announcing that something irrevocable had begun between them. Eliza expected instruction, perhaps dismissal, yet none came. The Duke remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed not upon her face but the fire. At last he spoke, voice low, measured, stripped of ceremony. He would not touch her. The words unsettled her more than any claim might have. Marriage had armed him with rights. Restraint suggested intention of another kind. She inclined her head, masking confusion, while within her chest relief and apprehension collided, equal and inseparable, demanding acknowledgement she could not yet afford. Tonight, mercy felt provisional, suspended delicately above darker motives she scarcely understood fully. The Duke turned then, studying her as though she were an unsolved equation. He asked, quietly, whether the rumors were true. Not which ones, nor how many. Simply true. The simplicity of the question stripped her defenses bare. Eliza's composure wavered, breath catching as years of endurance pressed forward. She answered with honesty she had never been granted in return. The scandal, she said, was born from sacrifice, not sin. She had chosen disgrace to shield another, believing silence kinder than truth. Her voice never rose, yet each syllable carried weight of confession long withheld from her guarded heart alone. The Duke listened without interruption, a stillness overtaking him that startled even himself. Images rearranged within his mind, old certainties loosening their grip. Revenge had required a villain. Her words dissolved that convenience. When she finished, the fire cracked sharply, filling the pause he could not. He realized then how eagerly he had believed her capable of cruelty. His silence stretched, heavy with recalculation. At last he spoke her name, not as title or possession, but as question, tasting unfamiliar doubt and regret. That single utterance shifted the balance, unsettling power he had long wielded unquestioned within his own soul. Eliza watched him carefully, sensing the fracture spreading behind his composed exterior. She had not intended absolution, only truth. The relief of speaking it left her unexpectedly hollow. He asked whom she had protected, and for the first time she refused. Some sacrifices, she said, belonged to memory alone. Her firmness surprised him anew. In denying him that knowledge, she reclaimed something he had taken for granted, control of her story. The room seemed to exhale, as though acknowledging a quiet, irrevocable shift. Between them grew a fragile respect, dangerous precisely because neither had anticipated its arrival that night together. The Duke moved toward the window, shoulders tense, as though physical distance might restore clarity. Outside, rain traced restless paths down glass, mirroring thoughts he could not still. He had imagined this night as culmination. Instead, it unraveled him. For years, vengeance had provided structure, purpose, certainty. Now doubt intruded, unwelcome yet persistent. He spoke again, admitting nothing directly, yet conceding that he had misjudged her. The admission, slight as it was, carried cost. Eliza recognized its weight and did not diminish it with comfort or triumph. Respect, once offered, demanded reciprocity, and she granted it with measured silence only. They spoke little after that, yet meaning accumulated densely between pauses. The Duke offered her separate chambers, a choice framed without expectation. Eliza accepted, recognizing the gesture as boundary rather than kindness. When he reached the door, his hand hesitated on the handle. He said her name again, softer, and something unguarded flickered across his face. For an instant, she glimpsed the man beneath calculation, shaped by loss rather than malice. Then restraint returned, sealing the moment away like an unopened letter. It promised meaning deferred, tension preserved, and consequences neither could yet fully foresee within their shared uncertain future. Alone again, Eliza removed her jewelry slowly. Each piece returned to its box with care. The woman reflected in the mirror appeared unchanged, yet inwardly something had shifted irreversibly. She had spoken truth and survived its telling. More unexpectedly, she had been believed, at least in part. That fragile victory steadied her. She sat by the fire, book in hand, rereading familiar verses with new awareness. The Duke was no longer merely adversary. He had become witness, and witnesses carried power as well as responsibility. Whether he would honor that responsibility remained uncertain, suspended between intention and action still tonight. In his own chamber, the Duke stood sleepless, jacket discarded, thoughts restless. The image of Eliza's steady gaze intruded upon his resolve, disrupting long-rehearsed justifications. Revenge had promised satisfaction, not complication. He poured brandy, untouched, watching amber light catch the glass. For the first time, he considered retreat, or alteration, though pride resisted fiercely. To abandon his design meant confronting his own cruelty. Yet to proceed unchanged now felt perilously close to injustice. The realization unsettled him more deeply than anger ever had, planting doubt where certainty once ruled. He recognized this doubt as dangerous, transformative, and impossible alone. Before dawn, the household slept uneasily, unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding within its walls. Two lives, joined by contract, had encountered truth without witness. Eliza lay wakeful, unafraid yet uncertain, while the Duke stared into encroaching light, plans in disarray. Neither knew what shape their union would take, only that it could not remain what it had been. Somewhere between confession and silence, a choice waited. When morning came, it would demand decision, and whatever followed would test whether vengeance could yield to something far more dangerous, understanding. That reckoning promised to redefine them both before society ever noticed. Morning arrived with a brittle clarity, sunlight striking the Duke's ancestral hall as though summoned to witness reckoning. Eliza stood beside him beneath the gaze of painted forebears, their expressions stern, expectant. Word had spread overnight, summoned by his command, drawing relatives, allies, and the ever-hungry arbiters of reputation. The room filled with murmurs, silk brushing stone, anticipation tightening like a held breath. Eliza felt the familiar pressure of scrutiny, yet something within her remained steadier now. She had endured worse. She had survived silence. Today, whatever unfolded, she would not retreat from herself again. The Duke watched the assembly gather, every face a reminder of complicity. He had chosen this setting deliberately. Power, he knew, must confront itself where it had been nurtured. When the final chair scraped into place, he stepped forward, commanding attention without raising his voice. He did not begin with apology, nor explanation. Instead, he spoke of truth, of how easily lies flourished when comforted by convenience. Each word measured, each pause deliberate, he dismantled the narrative that had sustained his vengeance. Murmurs rose, sharpened by discomfort. Eliza sensed the tide turning, not toward favor, but toward unease. He named the scandal at last, not embellishing it, not softening it. He spoke of a young woman who had borne disgrace to shield another's name, a sacrifice mistaken for guilt. Eyes shifted toward Eliza, some narrowing, others widening with reluctant comprehension. She did not lower her gaze. Her stillness anchored the room, lending weight to his testimony. When he acknowledged his own role, admitting he had exploited Fawcett for retribution, the silence deepened. Power confessed is power transformed. The Duke's voice did not waver, though the cost of honesty showed in the tightness of his jaw and shoulders. Objections surfaced, cautious then insistent. A cousin questioned evidence. A matron murmured propriety. The Duke answered each without hostility, offering documents, correspondence, sworn statements. Proof replaced speculation with unyielding clarity. One by one, defenses collapsed. Eliza watched faces change as realization settled, slow and reluctant. Vindication arrived not as triumph, but as quiet release. The burden she had carried alone shifted outward, shared now by those who had judged her without mercy. When the last objection fell silent, the room felt altered, stripped of pretense, uncomfortably honest in its collective reckoning. The Duke turned then toward Eliza, the movement unguarded, profoundly intimate despite the audience. He spoke her name, and this time it held reverence. He declared that her dignity had endured where his had faltered, that her silence had been braver than his schemes. He asked nothing of her, offered no demand. Instead, he pledged publicly to restore what had been taken, not as husband exerting right, but as man acknowledging wrong. The declaration startled even him with its vulnerability. Eliza felt emotion rise, swift and dangerous, yet she remained composed, honoring the gravity of the moment. When he finished, the hall remained hushed. No applause followed, no immediate absolution. Truth rarely earns instant comfort. Eliza stepped forward then, surprising many, perhaps herself most of all. She thanked him, formally, without embellishment. She spoke of endurance, of how dignity survived even when stripped of defense. Her words did not accuse, they illuminated. In granting him acknowledgement without surrender, she asserted equality newly forged. The exchange bound them not by contract, but by shared accountability. Something irrevocable passed between them, felt even by those unversed in such transformations of power and respect. The gathering dispersed slowly, conversations subdued, recalibrated. Eliza felt exhaustion claim her, yet beneath it stirred a cautious hope. The Duke escorted her from the hall, his hand hovering near but never claiming hers. Outside, the air felt cleaner, lighter, as though the estate itself had exhaled. They walked in silence along the colonnade, footsteps echoing. At its end, he stopped, facing her fully. Gone was the strategist's distance. In its place stood a man stripped of pretense, offering himself without armor. He spoke simply, admitting that vengeance had blinded him to her humanity. He did not beg forgiveness, nor presume it granted. He said only that he wished to earn it, if she would allow the attempt. The sincerity unsettled her more than any grand declaration might have. Eliza considered him carefully, aware of the risk inherent in hope. Trust, once broken, demanded proof through action, not words. She told him so, her tone calm, unwavering. He accepted the condition without protest. In that acceptance, she sensed the beginning of change, fragile yet genuine. They stood there, neither reaching, both aware that what lay ahead would require patience uncommon to passion. As evening approached, Eliza returned alone to her chambers, mind crowded with impressions. The weight she had carried felt lighter, redistributed across shared truth. Yet uncertainty remained. Vindication altered perception, not habit. She knew society's forgiveness was provisional, its memory selective. The Duke's transformation, however sincere, would be tested by time. She removed her gloves slowly, studying her hands as she had weeks before. They no longer trembled. Somewhere within the estate, he prepared to confront the consequences of his choice. When they next met, the terms of their union would shift again, demanding courage neither yet fully possessed together. Dawn unfurled gently over Ravensmere, pale light touching stone and garden with a promise neither hurried nor loud. In the days that followed the Duke's declaration, the estate settled into a quieter rhythm, as though learning new habits. Eliza walked the grounds without escort, her presence no longer questioned, yet not celebrated either. That absence of scrutiny felt almost foreign. She sensed eyes still watching from a distance, measuring the permanence of her restored name. Vindication had opened doors, but only time would decide whether they remained unbarred or merely ajar. The Duke observed these days with attentive restraint. He did not crowd her, nor retreat. Instead, he chose constancy, altering long-held routines with deliberate care. He dined with her, not across vast tables but nearer, conversation thoughtful rather than strategic. He listened more than he spoke, an effort visible in the set of his shoulders. Power had once come easily to him. Humility required practice. Eliza noted each effort without comment, neither rewarding nor dismissing them. Trust, she knew, was constructed through repetition, not revelation, and she intended to watch the foundation laid stone by patient stone. Society responded in fragments. Letters arrived bearing revised sentiments, apologies couched in self-preservation. Some invitations returned, others did not. Eliza accepted selectively, refusing to perform gratitude for justice long overdue. The Duke supported her decisions without question, a quiet endorsement that surprised many. At a small gathering hosted at Ravensmere, he introduced her simply as his wife, not as redeemed figure or symbol. The simplicity carried weight. Guests adjusted their manners accordingly, uncertain yet compliant. Eliza recognized the shift not as victory, but as balance slowly re-established through mutual resolve. One afternoon, they stood together in the long-neglected West Garden, earth freshly turned. The Duke had ordered it restored, not as spectacle, but as labor. Eliza knelt beside him, hands soon soiled, surprised by the intimacy of shared effort. He spoke then of his family's fall, of the bitterness he had nursed, believing pain demanded echo. He admitted that vengeance had felt like purpose when grief had offered none. Eliza listened, offering neither absolution nor rebuke, only presence. When he finished, silence settled between them, not heavy, but contemplative, as though grief itself had been given space to rest. That evening, the Duke made a final, decisive gesture. Before witnesses few and trusted, he formally restored Eliza's family name, publicly correcting records that had quietly condemned her. The act carried no flourish, only precision. In doing so, he relinquished the last tangible reward of his revenge. Eliza felt the weight of that surrender keenly. It was proof rendered not in sentiment but sacrifice. When she thanked him, her voice softened despite herself. Something unguarded flickered then between them, tentative yet undeniable, signaling a shift from endurance toward possibility neither had yet dared name. The climax came not in grand halls, but in the library, firelight steady, rain tapping insistently against windows. The Duke stood before her, composed yet visibly resolved. He told her he loved her, not as conquest or penance, but as choice. He acknowledged the risk of the words, offered them without expectation. Eliza felt the moment's gravity settle around them, echoing the night of their vows now transformed. She did not answer at once. Instead, she crossed the room, placing the book of poetry he had once sent upon the table between them. She spoke of trust, of how love must be built upon freedom, not fey. Then, quietly, she told him she was willing to try. The acceptance altered him more profoundly than forgiveness might have. Relief passed across his features, followed by something deeper, steadier. He did not reach for her immediately. When he did, it was tentative, a question rather than claim. Eliza placed her hand in his, feeling the certainty of his restraint, the warmth of intention finally unburdened by strategy. In that gesture lay their true union, forged not by scandal or spectacle, but by mutual recognition. The fire crackled softly, bearing witness to a beginning shaped by conscious choice rather than necessity. Years later, Ravensmere would be known less for its former intrigues than for its quiet constancy. Eliza's grace became legend, not because it endured humiliation, but because it redefined strength. The Duke's legacy shifted likewise, his power remembered for protection rather than retribution. Together, they cultivated not perfection, but honesty, allowing affection to grow unhurried, resilient. On certain evenings, they walked the restored garden at dusk, hands entwined, aware of the long road traveled to reach such simplicity. History would record titles, estates, alliances. It would not note the precise moment vengeance loosened its hold, or when dignity proved stronger than shame. Yet within those walls, a different record endured, written in trust hard-won and love chosen daily. Eliza Ashcombe, once whispered about, became a woman remembered for unwavering resolve. The Duke, once feared, learned to be worthy. And in choosing understanding over revenge, they discovered that the truest legacy was not power reclaimed, but humanity restored.